Okay, trying to bring this stuff together. Okay, so, remember, Roger Penrose has this theory of how the collapse works. That it's an objective kind of collapse. It's not many worlds. What you see really is what you get. The universe you see is the one that's happened. And the way it collapses is that if the curvature of space-time gets past this threshold that's related to the Planck mass, that would be caused by that, then the particles involved will decohere. So two particles, let's say in the sheet, this distributed form, they come by, and if each one is curving space-time a little bit, and when the combined curvature, if it's too hot, then they both decohere and you have an event. And remember, both before this event and after, the particles in some sense will have been in a coherent state, and the superposed state, and then will return to such a state if the particle exists at all. And it's really that event that shows the particulate nature. It's that event that is like this little mark that is like, behaves like particles and points. Leaves a little speck on a screen, right? Doesn't mean the particle ever really existed as just a particle. It just means that when this coherent version interacts, it's going to interact at a point in its overall space. Okay, so there's two ways this can happen. The one I just described, multiple particles and they cause each other to decohere. And then the other way in his theory, though, is through quantum gravity. Over time, a particle will cause this collapse itself from its own quantum gravity, interacting with itself, basically. The curvature will exceed something over a given enough time, the threshold, and the thing will collapse. For whatever reason, Penrose thinks this type of collapse might be related to cognition, consciousness. Okay, speculation, it's speculation. But, you know, speculation is allowed in science. When Einstein just did a thought experiment, that's speculation, coming up with special relativity. But what made it legitimate to science is that it could be tested. And it was really accepted quite slowly. And oddly enough, Einstein never got the Nobel Prize for that. He got it for the photoelectric effect. And partly this is because it was so fantastical, but it could be tested, and after a few years it did get tested with the famous experiment during an eclipse to see if the sun bends light paths. Okay, as predicted. Okay, so that sits there. Now Hameroff is off on his own thinking that, hey, microtubules are like the brains of cells. They're the things that are materially showing these processes that make something appear alive. But he was thinking it was computational. But it occurs to him that perhaps this could be going on in the microtubules. And microtubules are made out of a protein called tubulin, of which there is, I think it's called beta tubulin, that is only found in neurons, right? And he's thinking the tubulin could be like a vessel for this kind of self-collapse, an orchestrated objective reduction from coherent into the decoherence. Now, a lot of people are reacting to Hameroff's ideas with, oh, well, it's too warm. And to me, this is like, maybe that's true, but it's kind of like people saying you'll never get a car to go 60 miles an hour driven by a human because it'll asphyxiate the human. You can't really... I mean, the fact is that quantum effects happen at room temperature all the time. I mean, electrons in a sheet of graphite are in a coherent state at room temperature. Okay, so we know that every time an electron is in an atom, it's in this coherent state. So, you know, just saying it can't possibly happen any room temperature, well, no, maybe really big things, but if you could have one molecule acting as a qubit, and there's no reason to say that that's impossible. We have to see. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about this is that also from Hameroff's anesthesiology side is a very promising kind of physical approach, because there is a brainwave frequency associated with conscious thought. And it's not, you know, the alpha or beta waves that in the 70s and all these brain wave feedback machines tune into. It's a higher frequency, 40 hertz. So it gives this model. And so within all of this together, the idea is that your microtubules can go into a synchronized, entangled state with all the neurons firing. So that subset of neurons, the network that's actually firing at a given moment, in this theory, it goes into a coherent state. And all the microtubules in all of those nerves share some sort of state. If not all entirely the same state, then they're sharing this pulsing, the phase of a related state, where all the tubules are sharing states over time, right? And it would be like a super neuron, because when you have 5 particles that share the same quantum state, they act like one particle, right? And so you would have a super neuron. Basically, what we experience as thought is bacteria brains, but all added together so they can think at once. Furthermore, the consciousness just lasts less than a 40th of a second. It would happen on this 40 hertz cycle, so it's going to be taking maybe half of that time. Maybe half of that 40-second cycle is classical computational processing of sense data. Why would it have to be classical? Well, because we're interacting, and that would be causing our nervous system to decohere. And that's information goes into the system, it goes into the coherent state for the other half of the 40-second cycle, and then collapses. And so you would be having this constant flooding pulse of moments. Now, interesting aspects of this theory is that, one, it means that consciousness really is a momentary thing. There's such a thing as a moment of consciousness that's disconnected from the subsequent moments. It also means you're not necessarily in a coherent state when you're behaving. That you can do things on autopilot, computationally, where your brain is acting like a computationally generated neural network, right? And we kind of experience things like this, that we do something sort of in a fog we can barely remember, and maybe there was a little bit of consciousness and we have a vague memory. Maybe none at all, and we're like, why did I put my glasses in the fridge? Okay, there are a lot of things that can be tested about this theory, right? And no, there's no proof that it's not worth looking into. People seem to me scared that there might be coherence effects in brain chemistry. I don't understand that. It's physics. We found biology seems to exploit all kinds of weird physics, like the photoelectric effect, you know, in the eyes. We exploit all kinds of weird things because evolution is opportunistic like that. It doesn't have to wait to understand something analytically before exploiting it. It has this technique that works through an iterative, interactive process. So, yeah, sounds like a physical theory. It can all be looked into physically. They do include neurological research. The anesthesiology research is medical research. And Penrose's is the most speculative, but this is how it happens. He's a modeler. Somehow he thinks there was a relationship between the problems of consciousness, which, remember, he experiences a consciousness, and the mathematics that he's worked on in quantum gravity. And given that there's not really much physical speculation on this, I think it's worth pursuing. I also think it's worth pursuing neurocomputational approaches, and maybe I'll make another video on that. But what else is there? All other speculation on consciousness seems to be controlled by mystics and religious leaders, and, you know, theories about what the substance of the universe is, whether it's more material or more ideal, is it more like thought or more like stuff. And there's no list of falsifiable premises. Hameroff is doing actual research where people are making calculations, can make calculations. Some of them are unflattering to Orch OR. They need to be addressed. And that's the scientific process that this debate can go on, and it needs to go on. And yeah, I like some of the aspects of this theory, and I think that just as a person that is conscious, there are ways to see if a theory feels or seems like it's going to reconstruct this experience as we have it. Okay, I'll talk more about some of the ways of thinking I think that are involved with this. But I'll summarize simply by saying, look, I think an interesting subject when you're on the forefront of some area, be it scientific or anything else, where you're forming these ideas, it requires brainstorming, it requires being creative, it requires coming up with ideas that won't pan out as well as those that hopefully some will. And what makes it interesting in the meanwhile, given that that process plays out over many generations, and there's no guarantee to be towards the end of any of them, and that we really should enjoy beginning that process just as much as ending it, since it never really ends. That was a fake cough. And I think obviously this is one that's at least middling. It doesn't seem, some of you seem to think, oh, it's obviously going to go nowhere. Well, fine, that's what you think. I mean, I guess the people that think it might go somewhere and those that think it will go somewhere, which as far as I know is pretty much Penrose, to go ahead and pursue that. So anyway, that's the theory in a nutshell. I hope I didn't miss anything. As I said, I'm probably going to use these videos as some source footage for making another video. Maybe I'll re-record stuff. I'm planning to add graphics and sort of make a little summary of this. And what I was going to say, I interrupted myself, is just that what makes it interesting in these periods where you're starting, or you're in the early part, or maybe you don't know where, somewhere in the middle in an inquiry like this, is what are the subjects? For example, microtubules. You really, if you're interested in any of these kinds of subjects, probably want to know more about microtubules. It's a very crucial part, and it seems like it might be the thing that is living in the sense that we understand it. So also it brings in Penrose's work with quantum gravity, very interesting stuff. The Planck mass being such a big quantity relative to most, you know, things that seem to reflect something about the quantum scale. So yeah, all of these things are interesting in themselves, and it really doesn't matter if it comes together to prove Orch OR or not. On the other hand, I think we might be a lot closer to disproving or something like Orch OR. We're getting into the area where we can do the tests. Also, I think that we really need to see a lot of the quantum gravity exploration. I'm going to look into how that's gone on separate from Penrose's work, because it's very interesting, the idea that we could test this the Penrose interpretation of collapse using things as large as dust particles. You know, he has an experiment he would like to do with the laser, but it needs to go thousands of miles, and maybe they can have it bounce millions of times or something through clouds of particles that are about 1 Planck mass. Also, I apologize, and I hope I didn't do it in this video again, but I always pluralize Stephen Hawking's name and call him Stephen Hawkings, you know, when it's not possessive. So I apologize to the Stephen Hawking fans who might have been offended. All right,